So this one time in 1941, the Japanese attacked the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. But we're actually going to talk about the follow-up to that attack, now known as the Doolittle raid. So basically, after Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt decided that we need to hit Japan as soon as possible. This is going to do a lot to bolster American morale, which had kind of bottomed out at this point after Pearl Harbor. There's a lot of back and forth on whether or not the U.S. could or should get involved in the conflicts in Europe, let alone conflicts in East Asia. Pearl Harbor would, of course, tip the scales and enter us into the Second World War against the Axis powers of Germany, Italy, and Japan. So we wanted to hit the Japanese back as soon as possible, to boost American morale, and also to shake the morale of the Japanese and get them to start questioning their leadership, because Imperial Japanese propaganda, a large part of its narrative at the time was that Japan was untouchable, because as an island with a very powerful navy and a very powerful air force, there was no one in the area that could substantially stand against them. And so they had had a very successful military campaign taking Korea, Manchuria, which is now part of China, as well as holdings in Southeast Asia and Pacific Islands. So the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff decided that it would probably be possible to launch bombers from an aircraft carrier. They'd never done it before, but it seemed like it should be possible. So they sat down and they did the work, and they figured out what they would need to do. They actually set up on airstrips on the ground. They portioned out parts of the airstrips to be the same size as aircraft carriers, and they had success with getting bombers to take off from that space. Doing it on an actual aircraft carrier out on the open sea is going to be a very different feat, of course, but it seemed possible. It should be able to work. So in April of 1942, the following year, the USS Hornet, a U.S. aircraft carrier, left San Francisco, hooked up with an escort of cruisers and destroyers, as well as another aircraft carrier, and started to steam across the Pacific towards Japan. They had to dodge some aircraft patrols and some patrol boats, but they eventually got within range of the island, a bit further out than they expected. But they did get in range, and they launched their 16 B-25s, the first of which took off, led by Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, the man who devised, led, and is the namesake for the Doolittle raid. All 16 of these planes did successfully take off, at times being only about 40 feet above the water, which is very, very low for a very, very large plane. So at about noon on April 18th, the bombers were spotted above Japan. Their main target was Tokyo. However, they did also target cities such as Kobe, Osaka, Nagoya, other similar cities around the area and on the island of Honshu. Their goal was to drop incendiary bombs on military and industrial targets such as factories, shipyards, naval bases, that sort of thing. And while they didn't destroy a whole lot, and they didn't do a lot of damage, and they didn't kill a lot of people, the actual goal here, if we'll remember, is to affect the psychology of the Japanese people and the Japanese military by sending the message that America could and would hit Japan directly if provoked. And they had been provoked. So, of the 16 bombers, all of them made it out of Japan. 15 went to China, as intended, crash landing either in the mountains and forests on the mainland or on the islands off the coast. The 16th flew to Vladivostok in what is now Russia, the Soviet Union, which had originally been the idea, but the Soviet Union was not at war with Japan at the time and did not want to get involved with Japan because they were having a heck of a time fighting the Nazis over on the Western Front. They didn't want to have a second front. So America went to China instead, who was having a heck of a time dealing with the Japanese. So all 16 of the bombers did get out of Japan. Only one of them survived, which is the plane that ended up in the Soviet Union. It was interred by the Soviet Union. The others all crashed because their crews had to abandon ship. Now, the result of the Doolittle raid, one, it was a huge boost for American morale. We did what we said we were going to do. We got hit by Japan. They bloodied our nose. We hit them right back. And this would later lead them to, through a domino effect, it would lead them to decide to make the attack at Midway, which we'll talk about later, but was a big turning point for the war in the Pacific. It also had the effect of shaking Japanese morale, again, as intended, because they're no longer untouchable on their perfect island. One of the other results of the Doolittle raid is the follow-up by the Japanese on mainland China. In the Zhejiang, the Zhejiang-Jiangxi operation, or campaign rather, better known or also known as Operation Seiko, in which the Japanese came into, they were already in mainland China. But while there, they began looking for the U.S. airmen that had been part of the Doolittle raid. And in their search, the Japanese lost 36,000 soldiers. The Chinese lost some 70,000 soldiers. But what's worse is the estimated 250,000 Chinese civilians that were lost in the following search for the U.S. airmen. Some of which were captured, some of which were executed. We'll talk about Project Seiko in the next video, but for now, you've got a conversational understanding of the Doolittle raid. See you next time.